My name is Jack, and I used to wear the badge. For 25 years, I walked the streets as a police officer, chasing down thieves, breaking up fights, and trying to keep some order in a world that never quite wanted it. These days, though, I do not patrol city blocks. Now I live in a trailer park just outside of town, tucked along a quiet stretch of road where the noise of the world feels a little farther away. I did not end up here because I was forced to. I could have chosen a bigger place in the city, something shiny with clean sidewalks and neighbors who barely nod at each other. But I wanted something different. I wanted quiet. Out here, life slows down enough for a man to breathe. There is a calm in these fields, a kind of peace I never found during all those long shifts on the force. And the fishing around here, let me tell you, it beats any lake you could find without driving half a day. Most mornings, I sit by the water's edge, the line of my old rod cast into the lake, a thermos of hot black coffee warming my hands. For a little while in those early hours, it feels like everything in life is just as it ought to be. My trailer is not much to brag about. It is old, weathered, and patched in places, but it is mine. I fixed it up myself when I moved in, hammer in one hand, stubborn pride in the other. I replaced siding, patched the roof where rain had been sneaking through, even rewired most of the outlets after a small spark nearly set the kitchen wall aflame. Some of the folks who live here do not bother with repairs. They let the rust and the leaks pile up until the place looks ready to cave in. Not me. I like keeping busy. It gives my hands something to do, keeps my mind steady. After decades of chasing criminals and filling out endless reports, you would think I would feel like I had left my mark on the world. Truth is, when I retired, I expected to feel accomplished. Instead, I felt empty. The pension barely stretches enough to cover the groceries, and once you hand over your badge, people forget your name real quick. I still get the itch sometimes when I see something wrong. That urge to step in, to fix it, has not left me. I suppose that is why, these days, I help the folks who live around here with whatever they need. Broken fences, busted washing machines, leaky pipes. I do it all. Mrs. Leary over in Lot 7 always calls when her porch steps slip crooked again. Old Joe nearly lost half his trailer in a windstorm last spring, and I spent 2 weeks putting it back together. I never ask for much in return. Sometimes a man will hand me a cold beer, sometimes a few bills, sometimes nothing but a thank you. And most of the time, that thank you feels like enough. I miss the work I used to do. I miss the uniform, the long walks down streets where people trusted me to show up when trouble came knocking. What I really miss is being useful. People used to look at me and know I was there to make things right. I still want that even now. Maybe that is why I keep fixing things around here. Maybe it is the only way I know how to keep my purpose. My life is simple. I wake up early, stretch out the knees that ache worse every year, and make myself a pot of coffee. If nobody needs help that day, I fish. If I do not fish, I sit on the steps of my trailer and watch the sun crawl across the grass. Most folks do not sit still like that anymore. Everybody is rushing to work, rushing home, rushing through life. Even here, in a park that should be slow by nature, you can see the hurry in people's faces. Not me. I like the slowness. I like the way the air smells in the morning. Damp earth, pine, and something sweet I cannot quite put a name to. It reminds me of when I was a kid, helping my grandfather mend fences near the river. He always said a man should know how to care for the things he owns, or he does not deserve them. I think about that a lot when I patch someone's roof or hammer in a new step. I'm a quiet man by nature, do not talk unless there is something worth saying, but I listen. People sit on my steps and tell me about their troubles, their families, their debts, their heartbreaks. Most of them do not want advice, just an ear that is not going to judge them. I give them that. I nod, I grunt, I say a word here or there. Mostly I just let them be heard. The world is loud, but it does not listen. Out here at least I can. So that is me. Jack. Retired cop, part-time handyman, full-time fisherman. I'm not chasing trouble anymore, But trouble has a way of sniffing me out anyway, and it started on a hot afternoon while I was fixing up Lenny's fence. I was halfway through hammering a loose board back into Lenny's fence when I heard the sound of an old truck crawling up the gravel road. The engine rattled in that familiar way that told me it had not seen a proper tune-up since the 1990s. I leaned on the hammer, wiped the sweat off my forehead with the back of my glove, and looked up. The truck rolled to a stop just beyond my trailer. Out climbed Earl Thomas, a farmer who owned about 30 acres past the tree line. Earl was a solid man, but that day he looked worn down. His boots were caked in mud up to the ankles, his shirt stained with dark blotches that looked more like worry than blood. "Morning, Jack," he said, tipping his cap in that quiet way of his. "Morning, Earl," I replied. "You all right?" He gave me a short nod, though his eyes drifted past me toward the fence I was patching, like maybe he was working up the words before he let them out. "Didn't mean to interrupt," he added. "Just figured I'd swing by on the way back." "It's no bother," I told him, setting the hammer down. "What's going on?" Earl shifted on his feet, pulled one hand out of his pocket, and scratched the back of his neck the way a man does when he's carrying something heavy in his head. "Had something happen last night," he finally said. "3 of my goats got killed." At first I thought nothing of it. Goats go missing sometimes. Coyotes get bold. But then Earl kept talking. "I thought it was coyotes at first," he said, "but they were torn up real bad. Not like a clean kill, more like they were thrown around." That made me pause. Coyotes usually go for the throat. Fast, clean, efficient. Predators do not waste energy if they can help it. But Earl's goats? He said one was found half a field away, dragged out like a sack of grain. And the tracks? Earl stopped and squinted like he was still seeing them in his mind. They were too wide, too deep. Not a dog, not boots either. I know the difference. I stayed quiet, letting him work through it. He leaned against his truck, chewing at the thought. "Maybe I am making a fuss over nothing," he said finally. "Could be just a big stray dog. Some breed somebody dumped." "Maybe," I said, though the way he described it did not sound like any dog I knew. "You call animal control?" He gave out a short laugh, the kind without humor. "Closest we got is Doug at the feed store, and he can't walk 10 steps without coughing up a lung. Look, I know you are not a cop anymore, but you always had a good head for this kind of thing. Thought maybe you could come take a look. Might help me sleep better." I wiped my palms on a rag and nodded. "Yeah, I can come by this afternoon." Earl's shoulders eased a little at that. "Well, thank you, Jack. I appreciate it." He climbed back into his truck, the old engine growling as he pulled away in a cloud of dust. I stood there a moment, watching the taillights disappear before turning back to Lenny's fence. Truth was, I did not like the sound of it. Not the goats, not the way the tracks were described, but I owed Earl a look. That afternoon I drove out to his farm. Earl was waiting near the barn, the sun low enough to paint the pasture in long shadows. He waved me over, then led me past the goat pen and into the field beyond. "Right over here, just past that thicket," he said. We walked in silence, our boots crunching dry grass and dirt. The land dipped toward the hills, and the air felt wrong somehow, too still, too quiet. Even the birds had hushed. Earl pointed to a patch of ground by an old tree stump. "That's where I found the first one. The others were farther out." I crouched, running my eyes over the scene. Blood dried dark in the dirt, clumps of fur stuck to the grass. Whatever killed the goat had not eaten much. It had just torn through it. A trail stretched across the field, the grass pressed flat like something heavy had been dragged. I followed it step by step. Every few yards there were more signs. Fur snagged on low branches, bark stripped from trees. Then I spotted something that made my stomach tighten. 4 long claw marks raked down a young sapling. Clean, deep. I pressed my hand against them. Each groove was as wide as my fingers. "Not a coyote," I muttered under my breath. The trail carried on, slipping through a narrow break in the brush and up toward the ridge. The dirt there was torn with prints that were too large, too spaced out for anything I knew lived around here. Whatever it was, it moved fast. When I circled back, Earl was crouched by another blood patch, chewing a toothpick like he always did when he was worried. "Well, you find anything?" he asked. "Trail heads up the ridge," I said. "I want to take a look, won't be long." Earl straightened, dusted his knees. "All right, I'd go with you, but I got cows needing feed before dark. One's calving soon." "That's fine. Just tell the neighbors to keep their animals inside. Lock up the coops and the pens. Better safe than sorry." "You think it'll come back?" he asked. I did not answer him straight. "Just be careful." Earl nodded slowly. "All right, Jack. You be safe up there." I watched him walk back to his barn, then turn toward the ridge. The sun was dropping fast and I had a trail to follow. The ridge was steeper than it looked from below, covered in brush and tangled vines that clawed at my jeans as I climbed. My boots dug into the dirt, sending small rocks tumbling down with each step. The air grew heavier the higher I went, thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. Halfway up, I stopped to catch my breath and listen. Out here, you learn to pay attention to silence. The woods have a language, and when it goes quiet, it usually means something is close. That evening, not a single bird sang. Not a cricket, not even the buzz of insects. Just a kind of hollow stillness that pressed against my ears. I kept moving. At the top of the ridge, the ground leveled into a clearing. The grass there was flattened, not by the wind, but by weight, like something large had been pacing back and forth. I crouched low, running my fingers through the trampled grass. The dirt underneath was packed hard in places, clawed up in others. Then I saw them, prints, big ones, too big for a dog and spaced too wide for a man. Each print sank deep into the soil, showing weight that should not belong to anything walking on two legs. My first thought was bear, but the shape was wrong. Too long, too narrow at the heel, wider at the toes, and the claws. God, the claws dug so deep I could fit the tip of my finger into the grooves. I squatted there, staring at the marks, and felt that old police instinct kick in, the one that told me when something was off, when danger was circling close. I had felt it on dark alleys back in the city, when a suspect lingered too long behind a shadow. I felt it now, stronger than ever. The prints led farther into the trees, toward a stretch of woods that looked darker than the rest, like the sunlight itself refused to touch it. My gut told me not to go in there, not without backup, not without a weapon more reliable than the folding knife sitting in my pocket. But pride is a stubborn thing. And besides, Earl had asked me to look, and I was not about to walk back down that ridge empty-handed. I followed the trail. Branches snapped under my boots, echoing louder than they should have in the thick stillness. The farther I went, the more uneasy I felt. At one point I caught the faintest smell on the air, copper and rot, the scent of blood that had sat too long. My stomach turned, but I kept moving. Then I saw it, another goat or what was left of it. The carcass was tangled in the underbrush, torn open in a way I had never seen before. The ribs were bent outward, cracked clean, like a hunter might split kindling. But no hunter had done this. Whatever it was, it had strength enough to rip through bone like paper. I crouched beside it, covering my nose with the inside of my arm, and looked closer. The ground around the carcass was a mess of tracks. Some prints were half hidden under the blood, but others were clear as day. That same long shape, wide at the toes, narrow at the heel, claws digging deep. I snapped a picture with the old flip phone I carried, though I doubted the grainy image would show much. Still, it made me feel like I had proof, like I was not just chasing shadows. A branch snapped behind me. I spun fast, knife in hand, heart pounding hard against my ribs. Nothing moved, just trees and shadows. But the feeling that I was being watched dug into my skin. It was the same feeling I used to get when a suspect's eyes followed me from across the street, waiting for the right moment. I stood there for a long minute, knife tight in my grip, ears straining for any sound. But nothing came. Finally, I backed out step by careful step, keeping my eyes on the tree line until I reached the clearing again. By the time I made it back down the ridge, the sun had dropped low, painting the sky in red and gold. Earl was still by the barn, stacking hay bales like nothing was wrong. When he saw me, he waved. "Find anything?" he called out. I thought about lying, about telling him it was just coyotes after all, but I could not do it. Not with what I had seen. I shook my head. "Not sure yet," I said, "but you need to keep everything locked up tight. Tonight, especially." He frowned but nodded. "You think it's dangerous?" "Yeah," I said, looking back at the ridge. "I do." That night I barely slept. Sleep did not come easy that night. I lay in bed with the window cracked open, listening to the night air. Normally I could hear the low hum of crickets or the distant bark of a dog, maybe even the faint sound of a train rolling through 3 towns over. But that night the air was dead still, like the world was holding its breath. I tried closing my eyes, telling myself I was just worked up from Earl's story and the climb up that ridge. But every time I drifted off, I jolted awake again, heart thumping, ears straining for some sound that never came. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep altogether. I poured myself a cup of old coffee I had left in the pot and stepped outside onto the porch. The night was cool, the kind that should have felt good against my skin, but instead it crawled over me like a warning. The moon was bright, hanging low, casting silver light across the yard. That was when I saw it. Not the thing itself, but movement. Out by the tree line, past the trailer, where the woods start to climb toward the ridge. Just a flicker of shadow against the trees, gone before I could blink. I froze, coffee mug halfway to my lips. My mind told me it was nothing. Maybe a deer, maybe the wind playing tricks, but my gut said different. My gut told me I was not alone. I set the mug down slow, not wanting the clink to echo too loud. My eyes stayed fixed on that patch of trees. For a long minute, nothing moved. Then faintly, I heard it. A low rustle, heavy, like weight pressing through the brush. My chest tightened. I thought about grabbing the rifle I kept inside, but I did not want to take my eyes off the woods. So I just stood there, staring until the rustling stopped and the silence pressed in again. When morning finally came, I was still awake, sitting on that porch with the rifle across my lap. The sun rose slow, spilling light over the yard, and with it came the sound of birds, cautious at first, then louder, like the world was finally breathing again. I told myself maybe I imagined it. Maybe my mind had twisted shadows into monsters, but deep down, I knew better. Later that day, Earl came by again. He looked worse than before, his eyes sunken, his face pale. "It was back," he said before I even asked. "Last night, took 2 more goats. This time I heard it." I motioned him inside, poured him a cup of coffee, and sat him down at the table. "Tell me everything," I said. He rubbed at his face with both hands, like he was trying to wake himself up from a bad dream. It was just after midnight, heard the goats bleating, real panicked. I grabbed my shotgun and went out, but by the time I reached the pen, it was too late. One was already down. I fired into the dark, but I do not know if I hit anything. Whatever it was fast. I only caught a glimpse. "A glimpse of what?" I asked. Earl's eyes shifted, uneasy. "Tall," he said finally. "Too tall for a man, and the way it moved. I do not know how to explain it. Not like a bear, not like any animal I ever seen. More like..." He stopped himself, shaking his head. "Hell, maybe I am losing it." "You are not losing it," I told him. "I saw the tracks. I saw what it did to that goat up the ridge. This is not just some stray dog." He looked at me like he wanted me to tell him it was all going to be fine, but I could not with the way my own stomach was twisting. "We need to keep watch tonight," I said. "You and me both. If it comes back, maybe we can get a better look. Maybe stop it." Earl nodded slow. "All right, but I will tell you right now, Jack, I do not like this. Feels like poking a hornet's nest." "Maybe," I said, finishing my coffee, "but if we do nothing, it will not stop, you know that." Earl leaned back, staring at the table like it might give him answers. "I know." That evening, as the sun sank low, I packed a bag with a flashlight, extra batteries, and a box of shells. My rifle felt heavy in my hands, heavier than it should have. I checked it twice, made sure it was clean and loaded, then drove out to Earl's farm. He was waiting for me by the barn, shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. "You ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," I told him. We set ourselves up by the goat pen, settling into the shadows where we could see without being seen. The night stretched out slow, every sound sharpening under the weight of our nerves. Hours crawled by, the moon climbing higher, the goats shifting restless in their pen. Then, sometime past midnight, we both heard it, the crunch of something heavy moving through the brush, closer and closer. Earl's grip tightened on his shotgun. My finger hovered near the trigger. Whatever was out there, it was coming. The sound of branches snapping carried through the night air, slow at first, like whatever it was out there did not care who heard it. I lifted my rifle, keeping it steady, eyes locked on the dark line of trees. Earl shifted beside me, his breath coming fast, shallow. The goats sensed it before we did. They bunched together at the far end of the pen, bleating low, stamping their hooves against the dirt. Animals always know. They feel danger in a way men cannot. The rustling grew louder, closer, until it sounded like it was just past the fence line. My heart hammered in my chest, every nerve screaming for me to pull the trigger, but I held back. Shooting blind into the dark would do nothing but waste ammunition. Then, just as the clouds shifted away from the moon, I saw it. Not clear, not enough to call it a face, but a shape, taller than a man, broader at the shoulders, with arms that hung too long, swaying as it moved. The light caught on something pale, like the glint of bone or teeth. Earl cursed under his breath, lifting his shotgun. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Hold," I muttered, keeping my rifle aimed. My voice barely made a sound, but Earl froze all the same. The thing moved closer, slow and deliberate, like it was not stalking prey, but studying us, curious. It stopped just short of the tree line, and for a heartbeat, the night stood still. I could feel its eyes on us, heavy and sharp, though I could not see them. Then, in an instant, the goats went wild. They rammed against the pen, bleating so loud it made the hair rise on the back of my neck. That was when the creature lunged. It moved faster than anything that size should be able to. 1 second it was in the shadows, the next it was at the fence, wood snapping under its weight. Earl fired, the shotgun blast echoing through the valley. The flash lit up the beast just long enough for me to see its arm. Thick, corded with muscle, ending in claws longer than my fingers. I squeezed the trigger, the recoil slamming into my shoulder. The shot rang out, and I thought I saw it stagger, but if I hit it, it was not enough. The thing ripped through the pen, goats scattering in every direction. "Reload!" I barked, fumbling for another round. Earl was already breaking open his shotgun, hands shaking but quick. The creature let out a sound then, low and guttural, like a growl twisted into something human. It rattled through me, deep in my chest, and for the first time in years, I felt real fear. It turned on us. I fired again, aiming center mass. The shot cracked, the smell of gunpowder filling the night air. This time I was sure I hit it, watched it jerk sideways, crashing into the fence. Earl fired too, another blast tearing through the dark. But instead of going down, the thing let out another sound, this one higher, sharper, almost like a scream. It cut through the night so fierce it made my ears ring. The goats bolted through the torn fence, fleeing into the fields, but I barely noticed. My eyes stayed locked on that shadow, waiting for the next move. For a moment it swayed where it stood, claws digging into the dirt. Blood, dark, thick, dripped from its side. I could see it glisten in the moonlight. We had hurt it, no doubt about that. And then, just as sudden as it had appeared, it backed into the trees, vanishing into the black. Branches cracked under its retreat, the sound fading until there was nothing but silence again. Earl was shaking, his shotgun still raised. "What in God's name was that?" he rasped. I lowered my rifle, but my hands trembled just the same. "I do not know," I admitted, "but it bleeds. That means it can be killed." We stood there for what felt like hours, listening, waiting, but it did not return. When the silence finally settled, heavy and final, Earl let out a shaky breath and sank onto a hay bale. "Jack," he said, voice thin, "we are in over our heads." I looked at the ruined pen, the blood on the dirt, the shattered boards. My shoulder ached from the recoil, my ears still ringing from the shots. But I knew one thing clear as day: we had not seen the last of it. "Yeah," I said, "but if it comes back, we will be ready." Inside, though, I was not sure I believed it. The next morning, the farm looked like a battlefield. The goat pen was torn apart, splintered wood scattered across the dirt, and blood stained the ground in dark patches. 3 goats were missing entirely, dragged off into the woods, while the rest were either dead or too spooked to settle down. Earl stood beside me, arms crossed, face pale as chalk. He had not slept a wink, and neither had I. We both knew what we saw, and no amount of coffee or sunlight was going to make it easier to stomach. "Jack," he said finally, voice rough, "this ain't no bear. You know that, right?" I nodded. "Yeah, I know." We worked in silence most of the day, patching what was left of the pen, burying the bodies of the goats. Every now and then, I would catch Earl staring at the tree line like he expected that thing to step out at any minute. I could not blame him. I was doing the same. By late afternoon, we sat down on the porch, sweat dripping down our faces, our bodies aching from the work. Earl lit up a cigarette, his hands trembling so bad it took him 3 tries to get the lighter going. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked after a long drag. "Leaving?" I repeated. "Yeah, just selling the place, getting out before this thing kills us." He blew smoke into the still air. "I mean, hell, Jack, it already cost me half my herd. What's next? Me? You? Folks around here?" I leaned back, rubbing at my sore shoulder. I thought about it, really thought about it, but the idea sat wrong in my gut. "You run once, you'll be running the rest of your life," I said. "If it followed your herd down from the ridge, who's to say it won't follow you wherever you go? You can't just pack up and leave a thing like this behind." Earl stared at me, his eyes tired but searching. "So what then? We hunt it? Kill it?" I nodded slow. "That's the only way I see." He shook his head, muttering under his breath. "Hunting something you don't even understand, that's a fool's game." "Maybe," I said, "but doing nothing's worse." That night I went back home, but sleep was no easier than before. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw it, those long arms, the pale glint of its claws, the way it screamed like something caught between animal and man. At around midnight, I gave up again and sat out on the porch with my rifle. The woods were quiet, but not in the way they usually were. It was the wrong kind of quiet, the kind that pressed in on you and made your skin itch. Then out of nowhere I heard it. Not the creature itself, but the sound of something far off in the hills. A howl, not a coyote, not a wolf. It was deeper, raw, and carried on the wind in a way that made my blood turn cold. The dogs in the valley picked up after it, barking and howling like crazy. Lights flicked on in a few of the houses down the road. Folks knew something was out there, even if they did not want to admit it. I sat there, rifle across my knees, staring at the tree line until dawn. The thing never showed, but its presence lingered. I could feel it watching, waiting, testing us. The following day, Earl and I met again at the diner in town. We sat in the corner booth, speaking low so no one else could hear. The place smelled of bacon and burnt coffee, just like it always did. But even that comfort felt thin. "We need a plan," Earl said, stirring his cup though he never took a sip. "Sitting around waiting for it to show up again, that ain't gonna cut it." I agreed. "We track it, follow its trail up the ridge, see where it's coming from." He looked at me like I was crazy. "You want to walk into its den? You want to wait until it walks into yours?" I asked back. He did not answer right away. He just kept stirring his coffee, staring down into it like maybe the answer was written at the bottom. Finally, he sighed. "All right, tomorrow then. We go up the ridge." "But Jack," he looked up at me, his eyes hard. "If we do this, we do it right. We go armed and we go ready." "You know me," I said. "I'll be ready." And just like that, it was settled. We were no longer waiting for the thing to come to us. We were going after it. But deep down, I could not shake the thought. Maybe that was exactly what it wanted. Morning came grey and heavy, the kind of sky that warned of rain even if the forecast swore otherwise. Earl pulled up in his old pickup just after sunrise, the bed rattling with gear. Rifles, extra rounds, a lantern, rope, even a cooler with sandwiches his wife had made. She had begged him not to go, he told me, but she knew better than to try and stop him. I climbed in, my own rifle laid across my knees, and we drove in silence. The road up to the ridge was little more than a dirt track, winding between pines that grew so thick they swallowed the light. The deeper we went, the more it felt like stepping into another world, one where men did not belong. We parked where the road gave out and went the rest of the way on foot. The forest floor was damp, spongy, with layers of fallen needles, muffling our steps. For a long while, the only sound was our breathing and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Earl stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. He pointed down at the dirt, where a print sat clear as day. Long, wide at the toes, narrow at the heel, fresh. I crouched low, running my fingers along the edge of the track. The soil was still damp inside, like it had been pressed down only hours ago. "It's close," I muttered. Earl's jaw tightened. He pumped his shotgun, the sound loud in the stillness. "Good. Let's end this." We followed the tracks deeper into the ridge, winding through brush and over slick rocks. Every so often we would find more signs, broken branches, claw marks gouged into tree bark, tufts of coarse hair caught on thorns. Each step tightened the knot in my gut. By midday, the trees thinned, opening into a clearing I had never seen before. The ground was littered with bones, deer, raccoon, even what looked like the skull of a cow, all of it bleached by sun, all of it piled in a way that made my stomach turn. This was no feeding ground. It was a graveyard. Earl let out a low whistle. "Good Lord!" "Quiet," I snapped, scanning the shadows. My rifle felt heavy in my hands, sweat dampening the grip. At the far edge of the clearing stood a cave, its mouth dark and jagged like the gaping maw of some great beast. The tracks led straight to it. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. We just stood there, staring. Finally, Earl broke the silence. "That's its home." I nodded. "Yeah." The air around the cave felt different, colder somehow, though the sun still burned overhead. A faint smell drifted from inside, copper and rot, the same stench I had caught before. My stomach clenched at it. "You ready?" I asked, my voice low. Earl swallowed hard, but his eyes stayed steady. "As I'll ever be." We crept forward, rifles raised, every sense straining. The closer we got, the more I felt it, the weight of something watching from within. It was not just in my head, it was real, heavy, pressing down on my chest. At the mouth of the cave, we stopped. The darkness stretched back farther than the lantern could reach, swallowing the light whole. I pulled the lantern from my pack, lit it, and held it high. The glow pushed the shadows back a little, just enough to see jagged rock walls slick with moisture. Something scratched faintly against the stone, deep inside, a sound like claws dragging slow. Earl shifted beside me, his breathing sharp. "Jack," he whispered, "you hear that?" I nodded. "Yeah." We both knew then, we were not hunters, we were trespassers. And whatever lived in that cave, it already knew we were there. The cave mouth swallowed us whole as we stepped inside, the lantern casting long, quivering shadows along the jagged walls. The air was thick, damp, and heavy with the stench of decay. My stomach churned, but I forced each step forward, rifle steady, ears straining for the faintest sound. We moved slowly, every footfall careful on the uneven ground. The tunnel narrowed quickly, forcing us to shuffle sideways, shoulders scraping the rock. The deeper we went, the darker it became, until the lantern light barely reached a few feet ahead. A low, wet growl echoed from somewhere ahead. My pulse spiked, and I signaled Earl to stop. We froze, the sound vibrating through the stone. It was close, too close. Then a scuffle, sudden and fast, came from the shadows, something large, moving. I swung the lantern, catching a glimpse of fur, dark, matted, glinting eyes reflecting back at us. Earl fired his shotgun blindly, the blast echoing like thunder. The thing yelped, a sound that made my teeth ache. I raised my rifle and aimed, but it was gone, swallowed again by the twists of the tunnel. We pressed forward, each step deliberate. Broken bones littered the ground, snapped and gnawed, some still fresh. The smell of blood was strong now, making my stomach turn. I tried not to think about whose it had been. Finally, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber, the ceiling low and dripping with water, and there it was, crouched in the corner, massive and terrible. Its body was hunched, long limbs bent in impossible angles, fur dark and sticky with dried blood. Its eyes locked on us, glowing faintly red in the lantern light. There was a twitch, a hiss, a movement that told me this wasn't just an animal. It was cunning. It was waiting. I stepped forward, rifle trained, trying to steady my shaking hands. Earl whispered beside me, "Jack, we can't let it escape." I nodded, understanding. We had come too far to turn back. The creature lunged, fast, faster than I expected. I fired, the crack of the rifle tearing through the chamber. It yelped, twisted, and slammed against the stone wall. But it didn't go down. It circled, eyes blazing, and I realized it was playing with us, testing us, gauging our fear. I fired again, hitting it in the shoulder. It roared this time, a wet, bone-chilling sound that shook the chamber. It lunged past me, brushing against my arm, nearly knocking the lantern from my grip. I stumbled, regained my stance, and took another shot. Earl charged from the side, his shotgun booming. Together, we forced it back, step by slow step, until it crouched against the far wall, cornered. Its breathing was ragged, limbs trembling, but the eyes, those eyes, still burned with a feral intelligence. I could see the bones of its victims scattered around, reminders of its strength, its cruelty. And yet now it was vulnerable. One final shot, aimed true, and it collapsed. Silence fell instantly, thick and heavy, broken only by our ragged breathing. The creature lay still, smoke rising faintly from its fur where the bullets had burned. Earl and I stared, neither of us speaking. Neither of us dared to move closer at first. Finally, I lowered the rifle slowly, the weight of what we had done sinking in. This was it. The end of the terror that had haunted the ridge, that had killed indiscriminately, that had terrorized the trailer park. We had faced it together, and we had survived. But even as I looked down at the body, I knew the ridge would never feel completely safe again. Whatever this was, whatever it had been, it had left its mark. Earl finally let out a shaky laugh, a sound of relief and disbelief. "I thought we were goners," he said. I just nodded. So did I. We stayed a moment longer, making sure the thing was truly finished, before we began the slow walk back to the truck. The forest felt quieter now, almost peaceful, but I knew better. The ridge remembered. It had a memory, and we had become part of it. By the time we got back to the trailer park, the sun was just breaking over the horizon, casting pale orange light across the gravel and sagging fences. The air smelled of dew and wood smoke, like a normal morning. But it wasn't normal, not after the night we'd had. I parked the truck in front of my trailer, boots crunching on the gravel. My jacket was still streaked with dried blood, dark against the denim, but I didn't bother changing yet. 2 kids were already outside, bouncing a half-flat ball back and forth along the cracked loop of road where they always played. One of them was Eli from Lot 12, the same boy who had discovered the sheep. He froze when he saw me, squinting, unsure if it was really me or some shadow of the night before. His gaze fell on the stains on my jacket, then lifted again to my face. He didn't speak. I didn't explain. Kids like him notice everything, but sometimes the smartest thing is knowing when to stay silent. I gave him a short nod and kept walking. That was enough. Across the park, life was waking up. Porch doors creaked, someone dragged a trash bin to the curb. A kettle whistled in a trailer, and a radio played quietly from a cracked window. Most of the neighbors had no idea what had happened last night, and I had no intention of telling them. But a few were waiting. Those who had seen me leave with my rifle slung across my back. Frank from Lot 3 leaned against his truck, arms crossed, cigarette dangling loosely. Mrs. Leary stood on her porch in slippers and a housecoat, gripping her tea as though it might fall. I didn't wave. I didn't speak. I just met their eyes, steady and calm. In that quiet, something passed between us. A wordless understanding. The kids were safe. That was all they needed to know. After a shower and a fresh shirt, I climbed back into the truck and drove into town. I had business to finish. The police station looked the same as it had back when I was on the force. Plain brick walls, faded badge logo on the front window, flag flapping lazily in the morning breeze. Inside, the front desk had been updated. A glass partition, 2 modern computers. A young officer looked up when I stepped in, gave a half nod, and asked who I was there to see. "Jensen," I said. He pointed toward the back, a little too eagerly. I guessed he hadn't seen much action since high school graduation. Jensen was in the same office, papers stacked high, plaques gathering dust. His hair was thinner, gut larger, but the moment he saw me, he grinned like no time had passed. "Well, look who the cat dragged in. Finally come to teach these rookies how to hold a gun," he said, leaning back in his chair. Not quite, I thought. "I'm here to file a report," I said. And the grin faded. I told him everything, about the cave in the ridge, the body I'd found, how it had been there for weeks. About Trent McKee, the pumpkin farmer from the next town over. Not much was left of him, but enough to identify him. Jensen listened silently. After a long pause, he asked, "Any idea what did it?" "A large wolf, aggressive, real territorial. I tracked it last night." "Did you kill it?" I nodded. "Yeah." "And the body?" "I burned it. Took it to the old junkyard behind Miller's. Set it on fire." He raised an eyebrow, the kind of look that said he had questions, but wasn't going to voice them. We'd known each other too long for that. He just scribbled a note, gave me a slow nod. "You still got it," he said. "Barely," I admitted. "Ever think of coming back?" "Not full-time. Just helping train the new guys." He clapped me on the shoulder with that same rough hand I remembered. Then I left the station, words lingering in my mind. At first it sounded like a joke, but as I drove past empty farms and quiet lots, I realized it wasn't. Retirement was supposed to be quiet, slow, but these past few days reminded me what it felt like to matter, to be needed. By the time I pulled into the trailer park and saw the kids playing, carefree again, I knew something had changed. I wasn't done. Not yet. Maybe I didn't wear the badge anymore, but I still had something to give. And maybe that was enough. Evening had fallen by the time I got back to my trailer, the sky painted in bruised purples and faint streaks of amber. The kids were inside now. The park quiet except for the occasional bark of a dog or the distant hum of a passing car. I sat on my porch for a long while, sipping coffee that had gone cold, thinking about everything that had happened. The night was quiet, almost deceivingly so, but I knew better. I'd seen what prowled the ridge, what could reach into a place you thought was safe and tear it apart in minutes. That memory, Trent McKee, the shredded livestock, the den dug into the earth, wouldn't leave me, and it shouldn't. I went over my plan again, mentally tracing every step I'd taken, every tool I'd packed, every caution I'd employed. This thing had been clever, careful, patient, but it had limits. And last night, I'd found one. Still, I couldn't shake the thought of what might have happened if I'd waited, if I hadn't acted. That realization made my hands tighten around the mug. Sometimes, survival wasn't about bravery. It was about timing, preparation, and a willingness to do what most people wouldn't. By the time I finally stood, the sky had darkened to a deep indigo. I went inside, set the mug in the sink, and checked the locks on my doors and windows. Old habits die hard, and I wasn't about to give the ridge, or anything that lived in it, the slightest advantage. I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror, blood-streaked jacket, worn hands, tired eyes. Not a hero, not a legend, just a man who had done what he had to. That was enough, for now. The phone rang, startling me. It was Jensen. "Everything all right?" his voice said, careful but not suspicious. "Yeah," I replied, "all quiet here. For tonight, anyway." He didn't press, just nodded, though I could hear it through the line. "Good, and thanks for handling things, the way you did." I didn't answer right away, just listened to the faint static, the distant crickets beginning their night song again. Finally, I said, "Just doing what needed doing." After hanging up, I walked to the back of the trailer. The ridge loomed in the distance, dark and silent under the moonlight. I could feel it watching, waiting. Whatever else it was, it had learned something too. That was fine. I'd be ready next time. I went to bed that night with the rifle leaned against the wall, gloves within reach, and a quiet resolve in my chest. The ridge wasn't safe, the woods weren't safe, and people still needed protecting, even if they didn't know it. Sleep came in fits, but I welcomed it anyway. Morning would come, the park would wake, and life would carry on as if nothing had happened. But I knew better, and when the ridge called again, I would be ready. Because some things, no matter how fast or strong, couldn't outrun someone willing to fight back. And I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot.